Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. It is Friday, October 17th, 2014, and I'm Leanne McAdoo. Let's get right into the news tonight. Well, the most transparent administration ever has some explaining to do. Remember earlier this year when Obama said the chance that Ebola would become an issue here for America was very, very unlikely that it would hit our shores? Well, a federal government-funded study found nearly a 25% chance of Ebola reaching the U.S. in September. Now, this analysis was circulated among federal government officials prior to its September 2nd publication date. But nevertheless, President Obama falsely said on September 16th that experts across our government agree that America's Ebola vulnerability was extremely low. Now, this is in addition to the CDC, who also repeatedly assured the American people that the Ebola risk was low, even after this alarming government study was completed and, of course, was shared with their agency as well. So here again, we are being consistently told there's nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, they know that there is something to worry about. That's why they've been gearing up with all the hazmat suits and the coffin liners. Now, here, in addition to Thomas Duncan, we have 2 other nurses, and there's a slew of other cases popping up around the country. Here, Ebola scare in Houston after a woman who returned from Nigeria found dead. A hazmat team was called out to an apartment complex in Houston, Texas last night after a woman who recently returned from a trip to Nigeria was found dead. This next article, breaking: Austin resident under quarantine after potential Ebola exposure. University of Texas student is being monitored for Ebola after he was on the same flight as the second nurse. And not even the Pentagon is safe. The Pentagon was partially shut down as a precaution after a tourist falls ill. A tourist who said she had recently visited Africa was found vomiting in the Pentagon parking lot Monday morning, prompting a partial shutdown of the building. And of course, it goes on and on. There are many other cases. My sister is a nurse here in Texas, and she reports that there are about 10 people being held in her hospital system that are just suspected of having Ebola. But of course, these cases aren't being shared with the American public. Now, the CDC is basically warning New York City to be prepared. Just be prepared. Now, they're not going to shut down any flights, of course, but they say New York City should be prepared for more cases of Ebola, as New York City is a main point of entry. Now, what would you do if you were the leader of the free world and you wanted to stop the crisis at the source? Well, you'd probably implement a travel ban, right? Well, not this president. He's just going to keep on letting it roll in and hoping that, it doesn't infect untold thousands. And also, when everyone's calling for a new czar, a new Ebola czar to help with this public health crisis, you don't want to appoint someone who actually has a little experience in the medical or healthcare background. No, you want to appoint one of your cronies who is not only a longtime government bureaucrat, but also a longtime Democratic operative.
Klain, of course, first came to national prominence as the chief of staff for Vice President Al Gore. He headed Mr. Gore's effort in Florida during the recount. He's gone on to be a successful investment banker, and also he's very well regarded in the Obama White House for his stint both as Vice President Biden's chief of staff and also as the person who supervised the Stimulus Act, the distribution of funds.
So clearly, it's not about appointing someone who has experience handling a public health crisis, but someone who has a long time of experience helping to make the Democrats look good and hoping that he can help this administration look good. Ted Cruz said, "We don't need another so-called czar. What we need is presidential leadership. It's a public health crisis, and the answer isn't another White House political operative. The answer is a commander-in-chief who stands up and leads, banning flights from Ebola-afflicted nations and acting decisively to secure our southern border." Now, that seems logical, but that's not what we do here. Now, when an actual doctor criticizes the administration's response to Ebola, he gets attacked. Now, this is the Huffington Post. They ran an AP story attacking Senator Rand Paul under the headline, Rand Paul contradicts experts, says Ebola is incredibly contagious. And their story starts, U.S. Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky told a group of college students on Wednesday the deadly virus Ebola can spread from a person who has the disease to someone standing 3 feet away. And he said the White House should be honest about that. Well, his comments directly conflict with statements from World Health authorities who have dealt with Ebola outbreaks since 1976. Now, these sentiments were repeated throughout the liberal media, and it's clearly untrue. They didn't actually do a little bit of fact-checking and research. They were just so quick to attack him for what he said. This is according to the CDC and their official definition of close contact. It's defined as being within approximately 3 feet of an Ebola patient or within the patient's room or their room of care, the area where they were taken care of for a prolonged period of time while not wearing recommended personal protective equipment or even just shaking hands with someone infected with the Ebola virus without wearing protective gear. So it seems like it's actually the CDC that's contradicting itself. Earlier this week, they said that you can't get Ebola from sitting next to someone on a bus or an airplane. You can only give Ebola. But here they're saying that close contact is defined as 3 feet, and saying if it's a prolonged amount of time that they can give and receive Ebola. Now, Paul criticized the administration, who has likened this disease to AIDS. They say, you know, we know how you get AIDS, we know how you get Ebola, but Paul says you're not going to get AIDS at a cocktail party. No one's going to cough on you and you're going to get AIDS. So, of course, the liberal media was so eager to attack him, saying, oh, I don't know what kind of cocktail parties the senator is going to. And they didn't even do any fact-checking of their own. They just quickly wanted to turn this into a political thing. And this includes a snarky CBS reporter, Katie Conrad. She tweeted, not sure when Senator Paul became a doctor, but says the disease can be spread from 3 feet away. So clearly, not only did she not check with the CDC's official definition of close contact, but she's also not aware that Senator Dr. Rand Paul has been in the medical profession for more than 20 years. So you can see, obviously, that his comments were directly in line with what the CDC says on their website. They're the ones that are constantly contradicting themselves. And this is even according to a tweet that the CDC sent out earlier today. They sent out one of their first Ebola facts, and it says, coughing and sneezing could potentially spread Ebola. Very nice. And then their next Ebola fact is about how long the virus lives on surfaces, that it can live on surfaces for a few days if someone with Ebola touches a surface. So here they're constantly contradicting themselves, saying it's not an issue for ordinary folks, as the president likes to call it. Meanwhile, they're quarantining and monitoring anyone who just is sitting near someone on a plane after the CDC sends this nurse on her flight, says it's perfectly okay, even though she's got a low-grade fever and she's feeling sick. So this is just total contradiction. And Obama isn't going to consider closing the border, even though they say that it's absolutely vital to stop it at the source. But he will send the troops to Africa. And now soldiers who are preparing for deployment to West Africa are given just 4 hours of training. This is 4 hours of Ebola-related training. The training includes hands-on instruction on how to put on, remove, and decontaminate personal protective equipment. It's followed by a practical test to ensure that soldiers understand the procedures. So here are soldiers who have never had any kind of hazmat training whatsoever. They're being given just 4 hours of training. Meanwhile, you have hospital personnel who are contracting Ebola, who are supposedly trained in this area. So this is really insufficient. One USA Today report describes soldiers being told that Ebola basically causes your body to eat itself from the inside out. Reporters are saying that soldiers are telling them that they're scared. They're being told that Ebola is worse than what soldiers have encountered in Afghanistan. So here, you know, a soldier, they can see their enemy combatant, but not when the enemy is an Ebola virus. Now, one hazmat-trained hospital worker has called the process of undergoing FEMA-certified hazmat training for hospital settings. She says it's mentally rigorous and it's physically exhausting. She goes into great detail about what is involved in removing and putting on a hazmat suit in order to make sure that you're not going to be catching any contagious diseases. It's very detailed. That's why you can see why some of these nurses were still caught this disease, even though they were wearing hazmat suits. So it's quite frightening to think that our troops are only being given 4 hours of training. And now these are our soldiers. Also, you know, he's sending out the 101st Airborne, which is the pride and joy of the Army. But he also wants to send the National Guard. Now he's going to be using his executive order once again to send the National Guard. He's preparing an executive order wanting to send National Guard, active duty and reserve engineers and logistical specialists to Liberia to help build Ebola treatment centers there. Right now, the soldiers that are being sent, they are staying in hotels in Liberia, hopefully not coming in contact with anyone who has Ebola. The president, of course, was met with outrage. "Oh, hell no," has been trending on social media. More than a few Americans think the Guard is the last group that should be involved. And instead of being at home, dealing with crises at home, they'll be abroad and possibly bringing a crisis back with them. And besides, isn't there something else the National Guard could be focusing on, like securing the border? Nah, that's not what he wants to concern himself with. Never mind the fact that the enterovirus has killed several people thus far. We're seeing a resurgence of a lot of contagious diseases making a comeback. Now a new photo has surfaced that's showing illegal immigrants there at a Border Patrol facility wearing masks and rubber gloves, and not really saying what that's all about, but they didn't give details, but they did say that the men did not have the deadly Ebola virus, but rather that they are working with the CDC to ramp up safety precautions at ports of entry when they identify a traveler with a possible communicable disease. So basically they're confirming that these men do have a communicable disease, and so they're giving them masks and gloves, and then of course will probably be shipped on into the interior of the country where they can continue passing on these communicable diseases to people here in America. So it's just more proof that we are in a country where our president isn't really doing what it takes to secure the health and the safety of the American people. And people are saying, oh, you guys are just conspiracy theorists. Why would the president want to do that? Why would the country want to purposefully infect its citizens? Why would they want to do this? Well, this is not a new idea.
In every crisis, whether engineered, natural, or accidental, the Obama administration has exacerbated it as an opportunity for control and manipulation. The Ebola outbreak is no different. But there are many people, from the powerless to the political and corporate elites, from hippies to microbiologists like Eric Pianka, who want radical depopulation. Just look at this letter to the editor. Of course, it refers to James Lovelock's Gaia theory, a popular way to sell radical depopulation to the masses, to the very people against whom it will be used.
I see the Earth as more than just a mixture of living things and inanimate matter. I see it as a tightly coupled entity.
And the way it's presented to the masses, it anthropomorphizes the Earth as a living organism and presents humans not as the stewards of God's created Earth, but as a virus. And Lovelock himself conveniently plays into their global warming alarmism, talking about global warming being a fever that the planetary organism, the Earth, gets from the virus, the humans.
And I like to think of it as a kind of organism and not just a lump of rock with life on it. Any organism can have periods of ill health, and it was pretty unfortunate of us to start worsening the fever that the planet was already in.
And of course, environmentalists quickly draw the obvious conclusion that if mankind's a virus, a cancer, it must be eradicated. And so Gaia has been used to put a pagan, New Age, happy face mask on the grim reaper of depopulation and sell it as both necessary and inevitable.
So what do you think is a viable figure that Gaia, that the planet can sustain?
I would guess, living the way we do, not more than 1 billion, probably less.
Here you sit saying we are